sisters, my name is Brother Nkosi, and today we're going to talk about the secret origins of the black nation. Now, how is it that it could be a secret? How can an origin be secret? Is it like a superhero secret identity? No, it's not so much that, but like in some of my other videos I said, it's going to be knowledge that we know, but don't know that we know it. And the reason that we're not able to articulate it and really understand it is because we don't have proper context. So what we're going to do today is put it in the proper context, and you'll see that it was information that you had all along, but you couldn't see it properly because you lacked the proper context in which to view it in. And once you have that proper context, you'll be crystal clear as to understanding the black nation and how it came to be. So first, I'm going to kind of show you how it's pictured in your mind currently. So I'm with the aid, and how I'm going to do that is I'm going to have my friend here, Mr. Sketchy, show you how it is that we kind of visualize things in our minds. Mr. Sketchy, have at it. We're going to stop for a moment, back up, and at each point we're going to put things in the proper perspective and give them their proper sense of importance so that we can have a fuller understanding of our actual origins as a nation here in America. But first we have to go back to the motherland for a moment. So let's look at this map here of Africa. Now, first thing we have to understand, which we know but we have a tendency to not know at the same time, is that Africa is a continent, not a country. Why is that important? Well, it's important because as a continent, it's made up of many nations. African nations, but many nations nonetheless. Why is that important? Well, it's important for the same reason it's important when you think of the Europeans, you think of white people. But when you drill down, you say, well, I'm talking specifically about the French. Well, once you say the French, in your mind you understand that the French, they speak French, and parlez-vous français, and oui, monsieur, and you think of French cuisine or whatever else you might think of, Eiffel Tower. As soon as you say the French, you know that they have a specific, distinct history. And then if you say Germany, well, you probably think of, well, a lot of times you have a tendency to think of Hitler or whatever, though, but you do know that they have a specific history. Some of that history has actually come in conflict with France, right? You know that. And same thing with Italy and other nations in Europe. So they're not just all of a sudden white people anymore, they're specific nations within a continent. Well, the same thing applies to Africa, right? Same thing applies to Africa, specific nations within a continent. But again, why is that important? Well, because when we were taken from Africa, we weren't just taken from one location, and we weren't just all people speaking the same language and the same cultural references. We were distinctly at our core an African people, but we had different religious systems, we had different governance systems, we had different ways of sustenance. If you lived by the coast, you were probably some sort of fisherman. If you lived inland, you might have been some sort of farmer or hunter. So we had these different ways and different beliefs and all those different things. But see, it didn't make any difference when the colonizer came. Because when the colonizer came, and we're going to talk specifically about the colonizer in just a moment, he came and he took us as one people. He took us as one people, we were many people. And later, we became one people, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So now let's go to the colonizer. See, here's another unique situation. The colonizer usually comes and takes over the land, either totally kills the people that's on the land, or they will conquer the land and subjugate the people in place. But that didn't happen. Something strange happened, something different happened. The colonizer came, left the land, and took the people. This has never happened before. And there was also an unintended consequence of that because, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but what happened was that this caused there to be African nations outside of the African continent. In fact, new nations were created as a result of this, and we'll talk about that a little bit just in a moment. And I don't want to talk about the African nations in the diaspora per se, because that's a conversation for another day. I want to talk about the African nation here in America, right? But as I said, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So we have these African people being taken from the continent, speaking different languages, having different ideologies or belief systems, whatever. But now the colonization process begins. And what does colonization process entail? Well, regardless of who the colonizer is, be it French, Dutch, whoever, it doesn't make a difference. The process of colonization is always the same. You have to remove the people's culture, you have to remove their traditions, you have to remove their language, you have to remove their religion. Everything has to be removed and filled with the colonizer. And since there were different colonizers, that they themselves had their own particular cultural backgrounds and languages and whatnot, each colonizer colonized the person by replacing that African culture with their culture, or filling them up with them, as it were. Let's just put it that way for now, right? But that's not to say that the African was going to be just like a piece of stone being chiseled, because in the context of resisting, two things are happening. One, no longer is it just these multiple African nations. They're merging into one African people, a new African culture, made up of many different African cultures. So that's one thing that's happening. The other thing that's happening is that because there's repression, there's also resistance. There's this oppression, a force of oppression and colonization, and there's a force that's trying to repel that, right? And so those two things together merge this new people, right? The colonization process, but also the resistance process. Both of these things are what merges these people. And this is played out throughout the Caribbean and different areas, and depending on who the colonizer is, that ends up the finished product. Always with resistance, never with acquiescence, but always with resistance, and always with at the essence, maintaining an African identity, right? Again, don't want to talk about the diaspora per se, so let's move on to America. This is yet even more different than the other situation, because in the diaspora, you're being colonized in a third-party landmass, right? Haiti, Jamaica, whatever. You're being colonized in a third-party landmass. But that doesn't even happen to us. We end up in America, which would be called, quote, the mother country, where we're colonized. This has never, ever happened before. So our colonization has yet even a different characteristic than the other characteristics in the islands, because of the different culture that's here in America, right? So that's how our nation here developed. Still at its roots an African people, still fighting against repression, still being shaped by the forces of colonialism and slavery, but at the same time maintaining that African identity, rebellions, whatever. Those are the things that are shaping our dynamics, which in turn gave us the new African nation right here in America. So this is why it's important that we understand the dynamics of how we came to be. But it's never really explained to us. We just, we were slaves and we were brought over here, and then we fought for freedom, and Lincoln freed the slaves and all that old kind of nonsense. That's what we're taught, and that's what's floating around our head. But now we understand that we are a new African nation that came from the essence of many African nations, that was born of slavery, but also born of resistance and development, of maintaining that African identity at the same time of trying to fight for freedom. And that is the actual genesis, that is the actual birth of the new African nation. This is the context. This is the context. We must understand our existence. We talk about the science of liberation and the science of oppression, because they're both sciences. When you understand the science of oppression, then you can begin to understand the science of liberation. And it's within that context that I do keep it simple, make it plain. I'm asking brothers and sisters here to click on the subscribe button. I'm asking people to click on the like button. I'm asking people to subscribe so that we can get this type of different information out. There's a lot of information on YouTube, but I come from a totally different perspective. I come from the perspective of science. And so if you want to hear something that's a little bit more scientific in terms of dealing with the stuff, so that you become clear, mentally clear, as to what the need for struggle is, then please subscribe. Peace and thank you.